Good evening and welcome to Taking Stock. This evening we'll talk to Richard Rushton, Chief Executive at Distell. We'll also talk to Sibani Mngadi, who represents brand owners in the liquor industry, and to Charles DeVette at PwC, the tax consequences of turning away money. That's coming up this evening on Taking Stock as we look at South Africa's fiscal shortfalls and the consequences. And first this evening here on Taking Stock is Richard Rushton. Richard is the Chief Executive of Distell. We had the lockdown, the hard lockdown. We had the reprieve when there was a strong uptick in sales of wine and certain spirits, gin in particular, Richard Rushton. We're back in the lockdown frame once again. Just how hard hit has Distell been?
Yeah, good evening, Bruce. Thanks to you and welcome to the listeners as well. I think tough is the long answer. A short answer, we, as you know, we reported recently, we guided the market that our earnings would be 60 to 80% down. We've seen our share price track back, significantly. I think it's trading just below 70 Rand. And so all of those are significant impactors on the financial performance of the business. We were able to do quite a neat job of managing liquidity through the crisis and negotiate a payment extension of excise with Treasury and SARS, and also pay our suppliers, particularly our smaller and more vulnerable suppliers in the wine industry, for example. So we were able to honor a lot of our obligations, and so we're pleased with that come the end of June. Clearly, with the announcement of another lockdown, this has placed a lot of those sort of financial mitigation actions that we put in place under more stress.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about excise duties that is so important to understand is once you've produced a case of brandy and it goes into your warehouse, you're obliged immediately to pay that excise duty over to SARS. And SARS has so far been able to give you a bit of a payment holiday on that until the sales can happen once again, which comes with some relief. But you can't do this in perpetuity. I mean, jobs across the country, up to 3 million jobs are estimated to have been lost in our economy altogether. Have you been able to hold on to staff, or have you had to let people go?
At this point, we haven't let anybody go. Our first priority was to actually just protect livelihoods. The long-term structural fallout of further job losses in South Africa, we all know it's significant. So what we've done is taken a lot of other measures. So we have made announcements around salary freezes, some benefits, sacrifices. People have taken leave, and leave sacrifices have been put in place. Obviously, with further extended lockdowns, those avenues, they start to become less obvious, and, we're going to have to look at other options, unfortunately, as an industry, and obviously Distell. Retrenchment would be the last one, simply because the impact both for us as a business on morale, the psyche of the business, on jobs, the socio-economic fallout in South Africa, you've got to weigh those up against, some small short-term financial benefits. So it would be a last resort.
As the biggest liquor producer in South Africa, outside of the beer producers, I mean, do you accept the government's got a problem, a capacity problem when it comes to the healthcare system, the rationale behind the banning of the sale of alcohol once again? Or is there, in terms of the laws of economics, a better quid pro quo that could be struck?
Yeah, I think no question the healthcare system, particularly in the public sector, is under pressure. The private sector, the little bit of information that we've been able to gather through the lockdown would indicate something slightly different, that wasn't nearly as much under pressure. But we do concede that there's pressure in the public health system and that we need to respond to it. I think our concern has been the lack of consultation around the mechanisms and the measures taken to address the health crisis and the assessment of alternatives and the consequences of those particular alternatives. So an outright ban seems to be a very, very harsh and blunt instrument, which on its own, not sure it's going to solve our longer-term socio-economic problems. So, yeah, we would just question the alternatives and the consequences of some of the measures that we choose to take. And that requires consultation and discussion, which had been the case up until level 3 regulations were announced between us and government. So why not now?
What's happened to your export business? Because your export business, of course, is significant by any standards. Amarula is probably the brand best known for its exportability. Has that all been frozen as well, or does that continue at the moment?
No, that continues, Bruce. The challenge, of course, is and again, we guided and informed the market that about 54% of our exports that had been pent up in the lead up to the relaxation of level 4 restrictions could only be executed in this small window that we were given. So about half could be executed. And again, that's as a result of bottlenecks in our ports and harbors, as well as just, labor movements, obviously as a result of the pandemic, areas needed to be shut down, sanitized, so disruption in the supply chain and at the ports in particular. The Cape Town harbour, has been under enormous pressure. So the ability to execute has been a significant challenge, those export orders, and continues to be the case. But the answer is we can continue to do that, and of course we're doing that.
Going into this crisis, you were in a big restructure. You were getting out of your wine businesses. You've got well-known brands within the stable of Nederburg and Alto and others. JC Leroux comes into the stable as well. You were in the process of exiting those. Have those processes been destabilized at all in terms of the buyer's long-term view of a South African liquor industry?
No. So the good news is we announced, as you mentioned, the sale of 2 farms, premium estate farms. The one transaction is now significantly far advanced with only conditions precedent outstanding, and the other is also in a very advanced stage of negotiation, and the appetite for concluding has not abated, in that respect. So we're okay. We also, in that respect, and we've also, reintegrated that business in the month of July. So those plans continue. We've also obviously, on an ongoing basis, doing other things to make our business more efficient, and those will continue.
We've seen in recent years that South African businesses, because of the valuations at which they trade, have become increasingly vulnerable to foreign takeovers. While South Africans have been obsessed about getting money out the country, we've seen PepsiCo, for example, come in and take out Pioneer Foods. And one looks at the valuation now on Distell, considerably more attractive now than it was 3, 4, 5 months ago. Are you at all concerned that there are going to be predators in the water to come and take out shareholders in Distell in the not too distant future? Because you are more vulnerable perhaps than you would have been 6 months ago.
No, there's no question that is a risk. Having said that, we've gone on record to say that we look all the time for opportunities to consolidate our presence both in South Africa and on the African continent. And those would always be done in a proactive and friendly fashion with others. So, and we have a supportive shareholder, controlling shareholder in Remgro, who would also support us in that regard. So the imminent risk of that, I don't see as high as perhaps one might think.
And then just looking at the outlook for the liquor trade, assuming you get to trade in the not too distant future, government, of course, needs the revenues that it generates from the liquor industry. What sort of recovery path are you plotting?
Yeah, so we've got pretty robust plans in place to protect our balance sheets and liquidity and cash flow in the short term. And we think that obviously dependent on the length of a renewed ban of alcohol in South Africa, we'll be able to take sufficient proactive steps to protect our covenants with banks, et cetera, and as best we can, hang on to the kind of core strength of our business, both the people, the brands, and our presence across particularly the African continent. It's still a little bit early to suggest anything at this point, other than we've got strong mitigation action in place already to just protect the business and protect our sustainability as South Africa's largest exporter. So pretty confident in that respect, and actually got some nice, exciting innovations to come, which we'll continue to forge ahead with.
We look forward to those. Richard Rushton, thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive of Distell. On to Sibani Mngadi this evening, who is with the South African Brand Owners Association. Richard Rushton is angry and irritated by the fact the government has not been consultative in the process of this latest lockdown in terms of liquor sales. Sibani, from an industry perspective, as brand owners, you must be feeling pretty much the same as well.
Yes, Bruce, it's a lot of frustration. I mean, as at the beginning of this lockdown, level 5 and 4, there was a great deal of consultation with business for South Africa, which we were part of that consultation. We understood probably the need for the restriction and how it was going to then be adjusted down to whatever level. Even ahead of the opening on the 1st of June, we consulted extensively with the Department of Trade and Industry, giving commitments in terms of how we were managing the retail sector so that it doesn't contribute to the spread of infections when shoppers come through. And we were successful in managing that. Unfortunately, with the new lockdown, there was no consultation whatsoever, despite us reporting back on the good performance on the side of retailers. Certainly, we had wanted, before that, we had written to the president requesting a meeting to present some proposals that could have addressed the issue of trauma related to alcohol that ends up in hospitals, and we never had an opportunity.
How do we do that, though? How do you, as an industry, regulate how your customers consume your product? Because really, this is a matter of personal choice. I go to the bottle store in the morning, I buy myself a case of beer, I drink them all at lunchtime, my behavior is going to go out the window, and there's nothing you can do about that. How do you change my behavior?
Yeah, you correctly say that it's a behavioral thing. We work in that space. I mean, particularly the area where we have invested a lot of research and so on, it's on drinking and driving. The president himself correctly notes that those incidents happen especially at night. We think that with the proposal of a curfew and complementing that with better law enforcement, in which case we wanted to invest financially in that space to make sure that there is more effective policing and pulling out of drivers to screen for alcohol. I think the core issue in that space is even if the police screen people, the process of evaluating blood for processes of prosecution is very low. And we wanted to actually build centers where we can better process the blood and have it available for the judicial system to be much more effective. And I think that would have been a good deterrent for people who are drinking and driving. And well, there are other cases, actually, even gender-based violence. We had some proposals in that.
Well, would that become a permanent feature, for example? I mean, one of the big issues, of course, is securing prosecutions. You get a smart enough lawyer on your side when you're accused of drink driving, and there's going to be a loophole somewhere that they can drive through. This idea of setting up testing centers, I mean, would you commit as an industry to better testing in perpetuity to reduce South Africa's very, very high level of drink driving?
Yes, Bruce. So we are looking at this in a much more long term. It's not something to deal just with the lockdown or immediate problem of COVID. It is something that has been tested, and we will be able to scale it up. And it's something that we are prepared to invest in, and probably have these type of centers almost in every province, depending on the need, and increase it. It's something that has been bothering us. This area of drinking and driving awareness has not been sufficient. People are aware that it's wrong, but they continue to do it, and therefore we need to be much more effective in terms of enforcement side.
The South African government is losing hundreds of millions rand in excise duties each and every single week, and we're going to talk about the tax consequences of that in just a little bit. But in a country which is shedding jobs faster than we shed electricity, I mean, this is a crisis of very epic proportions. The trade-off between the need to keep a population healthier and out of hospitals for as long as possible so that we can deal with the crisis of COVID has got to be offset somehow with the revenue argument. And I think that's where you're bringing that to bear.
Yes, Bruce. I think the conversation with government would be ideal, because I think there are a couple of other factors that are contributing to this trauma issue. We have data, at least as far as Baragwanath only is concerned, and we haven't had access to other hospitals. We know that at level 5, there was around about 48% drop in the number of trauma cases with all the restrictions that were implemented, including no sale of alcohol. But in May, level 4, there was an increase of 30% in admissions in Barra. At that time, there was no alcohol present. And we need to better understand all of those contributors and deal with all of them, including just the socialization of people. We do believe that in an economy like ours, where we project a revenue shortfall of about 300 billion that the Minister of Finance has spoken about, we need to be sensitive to industries that are contributing to that. We contribute 10% of revenue for SARS, and therefore we need to make sure that at least we minimize the losses, because the ban doesn't necessarily lead to no alcohol use at all. There is a space that's opening for illicit traders who are really abusing the market. Just received reports around breaking into various poker stores now that are beginning to emerge, and then you'll have the cross-border illegal importation. And the worst case really on the illicit trade side is people who get pure alcohol, that's an AB alcohol by volume level at around 96%. They neutralize that, and they use particularly spirit brands to refill the product and sell it as a genuine spirit brand to general public that is not aware of it. And it poses serious health threat, and that's what we would like to discuss with them.
We've seen that also in the cigarette industry, of course, that report last week from UCT, which highlighted the growth in the illicit trade. Sibani, thank you very much indeed. Sibani Mngadi, who is with the South African Liquor Brand Owners Association. Thank you very much for joining us on Taking Stock. In a moment, we'll look at the tax consequences of the hard lockdowns and what it costs the economy. And wrapping up this evening's edition of Taking Stock with Charles de Wet. He's a tax expert at PwC. Let's just have a quick look, Charles de Wet, if we can, at the financial impact of booze bans, cigarette bans. How much money is the fiscus, SARS, government losing each and every single week?
Bruce, I mean, it's really a big number. I mean, the last announcements that were made, from a budget perspective, was that, there was going to be a shortfall of about 300 billion. I mean, I think it's got worse since then. The reintroduction of the booze ban is going to impact on that quite substantially. We have to take account of the fact that the liquor industry and the tobacco industry are really big payers in the process. Even if you go back and you look at the numbers for the last few months, whereas often for May, the collections could have been sort of 100 billion. Now they only 4 or 5 billion in the circumstances. So if we had a guess at the moment, I think that 300 billion is probably understated. It's probably going to be substantially more than that, and that has a really big impact on all the other steps that we're trying to take to get economic growth and economic recovery and moving in a particular direction.
I mean, the liquor industry naturally talks its book. The cigarette industry talks its book. It says we contribute 400 million rand a week to the fiscus, for example. I think that was the liquor industry's number. But it's not just about the excise duties, which are substantial. It's about the loss of income to industries, which forces a restructure of industries. It forces a closure of businesses. We're seeing, I'm sure lots of wine farms will face foreclosure, and they won't necessarily be bought out. They might simply go into disrepair, whatever the case might be. But when we start shedding jobs as a result of these sorts of lockdowns, government also loses out on PAYE, pay as you earn, income tax, and corporate taxes too. And this is where it gets really, really serious.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing, and the real impact in this is the effect throughout the supply chain. There are stories of farmers who produce grapes for wine that haven't been paid yet for their harvest of last season. They simply don't have the reserves to maintain their operation. So that has a very direct knock-on effect on employment, on the collection of PAYE. And we're just going to see the economic effects of that. I mean, everybody's very sensitive. We've always said that cash is king. But I think that we're proving it now more than ever, and people are really hanging on to their cash as much as they can. So while before the the lockdown and before the close down of the liquor industry, there was quite a lot of economic activity. There were lots of sales, but that doesn't mean that those bottle stores have passed on or paid their accounts to the wholesalers or to the manufacturers. So they out of pocket. The manufacturers have to make the big check, big payment and excise in the circumstances. Most of them are getting extension for that at the moment, and that rolls on to SARS in terms of saying, well, how are you going to balance the books now? You really have an impact. You've got excise that's fallen apart. You've got unemployment, that's happening. So you're not going to be collecting PAYE. There would be a big impact on VAT as well, because that also comes into play. If the consumer's not out there, cannot go to the buy booze and cigarettes or anything in those circumstances, there's no collection on VAT in those circumstances either. So I think we're in dire straits as far as that's concerned, and we can have as many revenue collection plans or ways to generate revenue for SARS, but I think that what we've seen over a long period of time is that people have been, all the low-hanging fruit has been picked a few times. Everybody became more compliant, maybe a little bit, less so in the last little while. But tax is not necessarily their highest priority in terms of making payments. And audits can happen, and SARS is doing their best in terms of getting out and getting audits done to try and force compliance and get collection. But any penalties that could be raised in these circumstances, any audits that are done or additional assessments are not going to get anywhere close in terms of generating the revenue that they need.
So let's assume we have a 300 billion rand shortfall, maybe a bit more, as you suggest is likely to be the case. Ordinarily, governments go and borrow money, and they go to global markets and they do that on the bond market, and they pay an interest rate and they fill the gap. Except this gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And for South Africa, which is now sitting in junk status, already is paying 21 cents in every single rand it collects in order to pay just the interest bill on that debt. At some point, we can't borrow anymore. Are we to that?
I think we are getting quite close to that. Already, if you look at the supplementary budget, we already saw that our borrowings were getting completely out of hand at that point in time. In terms of how do we make enough money if we can't even pay the interest on it, or we pay that percentage of interest? It's just too high. And the longer that we're in this economic state where there are so many industries that are badly affected, the longer it takes, the more years it takes for us to get back to proper economic activity and proper tax collections in the as part and parcel of that.
And this is the reality. And I suppose in difficult times, you've got to start making really difficult decisions about securing your income streams. And government's got to be really thinking very, very hard about where it cuts and where it doesn't in terms of allowing commerce to happen in order to raise the revenues it needs. It's really not a difficult conversation when you get down to brass tacks.
I agree with that completely. I think that all the decisions that are being taken at the moment are really complicated. There's no real guidance on that. And if we just simply take the recent liquor ban, while you understand, it's a good call from a hospital perspective, from a health perspective, but the moment that you put the economics and the tax collections into the mix, then you have to start questioning that. So it's how much emphasis you place on those particular components. But I think we've all been concerned right from the word go in terms of the pandemic is important and we need to plan for that. But there's sort of almost a tipping point where you have to say, well, when does the economic pandemic sort of trump the COVID-19 pandemic, and you feel the more industries that are affected by this, and in fact industries that could in fact make money even under the pandemic conditions, whether you shouldn't allow them to trade as hard as they possibly can so that we can generate the funds to get the economy moving again.
Charles de Wet at PwC, thank you very much for your expert analysis this evening on the dire state of the country's finances. Thanks to my guests this evening, Richard Rushton at Distell, Sibani Mngadi at the Brand Owners Association, and also to Charles de Wet, a very sobering perspective on South Africa's fiscal position and the consequences of not collecting easy revenues. That is it from Taking Stock for this evening. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.